society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You sacrifice one man trap.
There's a night in American history where 7 separate, unconnected failures had to align, in exact sequence, for one man to walk into a theater and kill a president. Historians who map that night minute by minute tend to come away astonished it worked at all. It was not a lack of warning. The president had received hundreds of threats throughout the war, more than any man before him. It was not a lack of resources. The government of the United States, fresh off winning a civil war, had soldiers, detectives, and an entire security apparatus at its disposal. It was not incompetence in any single decision. Every failure that night, taken alone, was reasonable. A guard stepped away for a drink during intermission. A general changed his travel plans at the last minute. A door was left unlocked because it always had been. None of these decisions, by themselves, killed a president. Together, in one specific order, on one specific night, they opened a door that should never have been open. He knew, in some private way he could never fully explain to the people around him, that his death was coming. He had dreamed it days before. He had spoken of it to friends, almost casually, the way a man speaks of a fact he has already made peace with. His name was Abraham Lincoln, and April 14th, 1865, was the night every failure the war had spared him finally arrived at once. Quick pause before we go any further. Documentaries like this take obsessive research to build. No studio, no network, just a genuine commitment to stories that actually deserve to be told. We are pushing for 1,000 subscribers by the end of this month. And we are close, but not there yet. If this story already has you, hit subscribe. Be one of the originals, the ones who were here before this channel took off. One click. That is all it takes. And drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one. We are almost there. Let's finish this together. Now back to Lincoln. Chapter 1. The man who already knew. Abraham Lincoln had lived under the shadow of assassination for 4 years before it finally caught him. It was not a vague background anxiety. It was constant, specific, and documented. Letters arrived at the White House by the hundreds, some crude, some articulate, many describing in detail how the President of the United States ought to die. His staff kept a file of them, thick enough to require its own drawer. He was, by nearly every account from the people who knew him, strangely unmoved by this. He refused to travel with heavy protection. He walked the streets of Washington some evenings with only a single companion, sometimes none at all. When advisors pressed him to accept a larger security detail, he waved them off with the tired humor of a man who had already done the math on his own mortality and decided worrying about it further was a poor use of his remaining time. He said more than once that if someone was determined enough to give up their own life to take his, no guard on earth could stop them. It was not bravado. It was resignation, spoken plainly the way he spoke about most things. 10 days before Ford's Theater, he had a dream. He described it to his wife and, separately, to his close friend Ward Hill Lamon, in enough detail that Lamon wrote it down. In the dream, Lincoln wandered through the White House and heard the sound of mourning, quiet at first, then unmistakable. He followed the sound to the East Room and found a corpse laid out in state, guarded by soldiers, surrounded by a grieving crowd. He asked one of the soldiers who had died. The soldier told him it was the president, killed by an assassin. Lincoln woke disturbed. He told the story more than once in the days that followed, sometimes framing it as superstition, sometimes with a heaviness that suggested he did not fully believe his own dismissal of it. He had survived an actual assassination attempt already, in 1864, when a bullet passed through his hat while he rode alone toward the soldier's home outside Washington. He mentioned it to almost no one. He did not increase his security afterward. He did not change his habits. By April of 1865, the war he had spent 4 years fighting was, for all practical purposes, over. Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox 5 days earlier. The city was in a mood of relief so total it bordered on euphoria. Lincoln, exhausted in the particular way of a man who has carried an entire nation on his back for 4 years, allowed himself, for the first time in a long time, to relax. He accepted an invitation to the theater. It seemed at the time like the safest thing in the world. Chapter 2. A guard who walked away. The plan for the evening of April 14th had, at one point, included a heavier security presence than what actually showed up. General Ulysses S. Grant, the most celebrated man in America at that moment, had been invited to join the Lincolns at Ford's Theater. His presence would have meant additional military escort, additional eyes on every entrance, additional reasons for a would-be assassin to reconsider. Grant declined. His wife, Julia, disliked Mary Todd Lincoln and wanted to leave Washington to visit their children. The Grants departed the city by train that afternoon, a decision made for entirely personal, entirely unremarkable reasons. It removed, in a single stroke, the most heavily fortified version of that evening. In Grant's place, the Lincolns invited a young engaged couple, Clara Harris and Henry Rathbone. Pleasant company. No military rank. No additional soldiers. The security that did exist rested almost entirely on one man, John Frederick Parker, a Washington Metropolitan Police officer assigned to guard the presidential box. Parker had a documented history of disciplinary problems: insubordination, drunkenness, sleeping on duty. None of it had disqualified him from the assignment that night. Parker escorted the Lincolns to the theater. He took a position outside the door to the box. And at some point during the performance, during intermission, he left. Accounts differ on exactly why. Some say he wanted a better view of the play from the orchestra seats. Others say he walked to a nearby tavern for a drink and simply never returned to his post. What is certain is that for a meaningful stretch of the evening, the door to the president's box, the single choke point an assassin would need to pass through, stood entirely unguarded. John Wilkes Booth did not need to fight his way past security. He needed only to walk up an empty hallway. He was, by profession, an actor, and a famous one, from one of the most celebrated theatrical families in the country. Ford's Theater was not unfamiliar territory to him. He had performed there. He knew its layout, its doors, its blind spots, better than almost anyone alive who was not on its staff. Days earlier, while the theater sat empty, Booth had visited and quietly drilled a small hole into the door of the presidential box, just large enough to see through, disguised well enough that no one noticed it. He had also prepared a wooden bar, cut to fit precisely into a bracket behind that same door. A bar he could use to jam it shut from the inside once he was through, buying himself time that no pursuer would be able to close. Every piece was already in place. He simply needed the guard to leave. On the night of April 14th, the guard left. Chapter 3. A plot bigger than one man. Before we go further into that night, there is a detail historians often mention almost as an afterthought, and it is the detail that recontextualizes everything. Lincoln was never the only target. John Wilkes Booth had not planned a single assassination. He had planned 3, timed to happen within the same hour, intended to decapitate the American government in one coordinated strike. While Booth made his way to Ford's Theater, 2 other men, recruited and directed by Booth himself, were assigned to kill Secretary of State William Seward and Vice President Andrew Johnson. Lewis Powell, a former Confederate soldier, was sent to Seward's home. Seward was bedridden at the time, recovering from a serious carriage accident days earlier, his jaw wired shut, his face bandaged. Powell forced his way inside under the pretense of delivering medicine, then attacked Seward's household with a knife, wounding his son, a State Department messenger, and a soldier stationed as a nurse, before reaching Seward himself and stabbing him repeatedly in the face and neck. Seward survived, in part because the medical brace around his jaw deflected the worst of the blows. George Atzerodt, assigned to kill Vice President Johnson at the Kirkwood House Hotel, lost his nerve entirely. He spent the evening drinking at the hotel bar instead, never approaching Johnson's room. Had he followed through, the United States would have lost its president, its vice president, and its Secretary of State within the same 60 minutes, an almost total collapse of the executive branch in a single coordinated evening. This is the detail that turns Ford's Theater from an isolated act of rage into something colder and more calculated. Booth was not improvising a moment of opportunity. He was executing a plan against a government he still, months after the war's practical end, considered an enemy to be destroyed at its head. Only 1/3 of that plan succeeded. It was, unfortunately, the third that mattered most. Back at Ford's Theater, Booth moved through the empty hallway Parker had abandoned, past the outer door to the box, and quietly closed it behind him. He wedged his prepared wooden bar into place. He waited, watching the stage through the small hole he had drilled days earlier, timing his moment to a specific line in the play, a line the audience always found funny, one that would produce a burst of laughter loud enough to cover the sound of a single gunshot. He had planned this with the same precision a stagehand plans a scene change. When the line came, the audience laughed exactly as he expected. And in that laughter, he raised a small Derringer pistol and fired. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The bullet entered behind Lincoln's left ear and lodged behind his right eye. He never regained consciousness. Mary Todd Lincoln, seated beside him, screamed, and for a moment the theater did not understand what had happened. The sound register almost identical to the gunshot everyone had just heard as part of the play. Henry Rathbone lunged at Booth and was slashed across the arm with a knife, a deep wound that nearly cost him the limb. Booth, having already unbalanced himself for the jump, leapt from the box to the stage below, a fall of roughly 12 feet. His spur caught the decorative flag draping the box as he jumped, and he landed awkwardly, fracturing a bone in his leg. He stood, reportedly shouted a Latin phrase associated with tyrannicide, and limped across the stage and out through a rear door into an alley, where a horse waited, held by a young stagehand Booth had arranged in advance. He was gone before most of the audience fully processed what they had witnessed. Inside the box, chaos gave way to something almost eerily orderly. A 23-year-old army surgeon named Charles Leal happened to be in the audience that night, seated close enough to reach the box within moments. He forced his way in, found Lincoln unconscious and barely breathing, and performed what medical intervention the era allowed, clearing an airway, attempting to relieve pressure. He recognized almost immediately that the wound was fatal. There was nothing surgery in 1865 could do for a bullet lodged behind the eye of a man's brain. Lincoln was too unstable to move far. He was carried across the street to a modest boarding house, the Peterson House, and laid diagonally across a bed too short for his frame. Doctors came and went throughout the night. Cabinet members gathered in the front room. Mary Todd Lincoln was, at points, asked to leave the room entirely, her grief loud enough to unsettle even the physicians. Robert Todd Lincoln, the president's eldest son, arrived and stood in a back room for most of the night, watching his father's breathing slow by degrees, unable to do anything but witness it. Lincoln never spoke again. He held on, unconscious, for roughly 9 hours, his body simply refusing to release him quickly. At 7:22 in the morning on April 15, 1865, he died. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, standing in the room, is said to have spoken the words that would define the following century of how Americans remembered him. Now he belongs to the ages. Booth, meanwhile, was already miles into the Maryland countryside, his broken leg slowing him just enough that the 12-day manhunt that followed would eventually catch him. Chapter 5. What the country built from the wreckage. The country that woke up on April 15, 1865, was not the same country that had gone to sleep the night before. A war that had just barely ended now had a martyr. Lincoln's funeral train traveled roughly 1,700 miles over 3 weeks, stopping in city after city so that ordinary Americans, hundreds of thousands of them, could walk past his casket in person. No American had been mourned like this before. None quite has been since. Booth was tracked to a Virginia farm 12 days later and killed in a standoff rather than captured alive. 4 of his co-conspirators, including Lewis Powell and the woman who had run the boarding house where the plot was partly planned, were tried, convicted, and hanged within months. George Atzerodt, the man whose nerve had failed him at the Kirkwood House, was hanged alongside them anyway, his failure to act treated by the court as no defense at all. John Frederick Parker, the guard who had walked away from his post, was never formally punished. He returned to duty on the Metropolitan Police Force for several more years, a fact that historians still find difficult to fully reconcile. The office of the presidency itself changed permanently. Formal, continuous protection for American presidents did not become standing federal policy until decades later. But the events of that April night quietly ended the era in which a president could reasonably walk city streets with no escort at all, could dismiss his own safety as a matter of private philosophy. Lincoln had spent years telling the people around him that a man determined enough to die for the attempt could never truly be stopped. On the one night every failure required for that to be true finally lined up in order. He was proven precisely right. He had seen his own funeral in a dream, 10 days before he needed one. He described it, almost lightly, to people who loved him. And then, on a Friday night at the theater, the dream simply stopped being a dream. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. We are this close to 1,000 subscribers this month. Don't be the person who watched the whole thing and kept scrolling. One click right now. Drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Tell me which part of this story hit you the hardest. The dream, the guard who walked away, or the two other targets most people never learn about. I read every single one. There are more stories like this one waiting. Stories about the small, human decisions, a guard's drink, a wife's preference, a nervous man's lost courage, that quietly decided the fate of an entire nation. Be here for them. Subscribe, comment, and I will see you on the next one.